how does it work? So they never asked me about funding, but like the person right before me, they did ask him about funding. What exactly goes in their mind?
So some people just are presenting so strongly as a student that they're an immediate yes, and so further questions are not required because I really don't want to waste my time. I don't have time to waste. That's another thing with the hard no's. If believe that finances are the number one issues, I might not even ask you about your university. I might immediately ask you about finances, and if I'm not convinced, say no.
Like again, I've heard conspiracy theory about visa officers that they are trained to read expressions and like psychology, like they just know that if the person is lying or not. Like how true is this, and like what kind of training do you guys do?
Visa risk score study, and it actually showed better approval rates for people who have taken out loans versus not.
How is my prior B1, B2 rejection impacting my F1? All right, so Yvette was a visa consulate officer in Mumbai and Delhi, where she interviewed thousands of students and have approved and denied their visa. She understands what goes into rejections and approval. She knows in and out about it. So this video is divided into two parts. First part is all about the myths of a F1 visa. Second part is going to be how to avoid rejections. We'll probably do more videos if you have interest on this topic, and if you have more questions which were not answered in this video. And if you haven't watched the first part, link is in the description. And finally, I also wanted to let you know, Yvette and I are hosting a 2-hour long masterclass where she will go through ins and out about F1 visa. We will have plenty of time for Q&A and make sure every single question gets answered if you attend that masterclass, and you can ask directly to her about your specific situation. We might even do some on-spot mock interviews as well. So if you are interested, please check the link that is in the description. And now I'll let you enjoy the video. Another interesting one, which I don't know if you haven't even like faced this, siblings going for F1 visa together. Has that ever happened?
I've never had two people come to my visa window together. And if they were to come during the same cycle, I would not connect the dots, nor I may ask, what is your sibling doing in India or your home country? But it would be a very odd thing to be like, is your sibling also going on an F1 season, this intake? So I think that you don't have to mention it unless it's directly asked. If it's directly asked, by all means, please tell the truth. But
And can
yeah,
both siblings go together as a one appointment?
I don't
Would
think so. I mean,
okay.
yeah, I don't think there's anything preventing them, but I would very much advise against that because
Right. Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah. And
that would be very
and
odd.
and if the two siblings are going together to, like, one is going to Chico State, one is going to UTD, they could, like, they don't necessarily have to mention unless asked. Is that correct?
Yeah, you're going to be asked about why why you selected your school and how you're going to finance your education. You don't need to mention your siblings in that scenario.
Okay, cool. And just because they both are going does not mean one or the other will get rejected.
So if the officer, no, I mean the person who does better at the visa interview, the likely scenario is whoever does better at the visa interview is going to get approved. But
Hmm.
if the consular officer gets to know, if they ask about your siblings and you mention that one is already on an F1 visa in the United States, and we didn't cover somebody already being on an F1 visa in the United States versus an H1B. Now there is another person who requires funding. So finances are going to be scrutinized more if the officer gets
Hmm.
to know that either you have an F1 sibling already in the United States or they're going at the same intake as you, because an H1B is an asset, another F1 is another person your parents have to
Liability,
fund.
yeah.
Correct.
Interesting. Okay. And also, sidebar, because you mentioned like they would Google it. So is that what officers do? Because I am always questioning. I've done like 3 interviews now for my H1B and extension and my F1. They always type something. What are they? Are they like taking notes, or are they like actually looking up stuff for you?
8 out of 10 times, all they're doing is writing your case notes. They're not
Hmm.
Googling anything. However,
Okay.
I am a big fan of Googling. When I was at the window, if you told me you're going to Chico State, I'm Googling Chico State. Where is Chico State? What's their graduation rate? I'm looking at their
Mm,
graduation rate, especially because if you have a high, and this was just me, if you have a high admit rate, like you admit 95% of your students, however, only 30% graduate, now
mm,
you're under fire at my window because I want to know why
mm.
you're going to this school. So that's something that I looked at, but other consular officers may not have the same practice.
Got it. Okay. All right. Now, before I go to the rejection, I want to ask you about funding, because this is another. I don't know if it's a myth or not, but it's said that you need to have 1.5 times the I-20 amount in your bank to get the visa approved. So, can you shed light in general
Mhm.
about funding and then this as well?
Okay, so there, the policy has nowhere does it say 1.5 times on your I-20. What it does say is that you need to be able to demonstrate and show that you can fund the first year of your education without resorting to unauthorized employment. So they're going to definitely want to see 1 year, you're going to have to explain that 1 year.
Mm,
However, in addition to that, the consular officer wants to see funding coming in enough to sustain you for the rest of your
program.
education.
Yeah.
Yes, and CPT and OPT are not going to count towards that. So you can't
Mm.
say the next year I'm going to use CPT to fund my education. They need to be able to see that you can fund the first year in completely and how you're going to be able theoretically to fund the rest.
Got it. And so, how does it work? So they never asked me about
Mhm,
funding,
mhm.
and but like the person right before me, they did ask him about funding. So
Okay.
what triggers like visa officer? Like I want to ask about funding, and two,
Mhm,
I want to now know the documents as well. Like
mhm.
what exactly goes in their mind? Like this person seems like I need to see their document, or this person I don't need to ask funding question. Like, how does
Okay.
it work?
Were you working UD at the time? Was there anything on your DS
Yes. Yeah,
160?
yeah, yeah. I was
And
work I
you're
was working for 6 months, like I was a software engineer. Yes. Yeah.
okay, and you had maybe like 1 lakh or something on your DS 160 or less a month,
3 lakhs. I mean, monthly?
monthly.
Uh, right. No, it was 35, 40,000
Okay.
rupees. Yeah.
Okay, so you had some funding on your DS 160 and and Chico's state tuition is how much a year?
That's yeah, it is cheaper. It's only 275 per credit. I mean, it was 35,000 on my I-20 for first
Including
year.
for first year,
Include
including yeah.
cost of living. Yes, yeah.
And they didn't ask you at all about finances, no loan questions or any finance questions.
No, yeah, because I think my answer for Chico State, and then there's just like and he was very friendly, so he just said like, and then he started asking me about party, and I said no, and then he's like, all right, go have party on my behalf, and so I was like, okay, cool, and that was it. Like he never asked me about funding. Yeah.
So So we have to adjudicate so many visas in the morning that if it's a yes, it's an F yes, or it's a no,
Yeah, yeah.
I will get that person out of my window immediately. So you come to my window.
Mm,
I love your answer about Chico State. I see that you're an engineer. You're making some amount. It's a school. This is where I ask myself mentally. It almost happens so subconsciously because you do so many of these. This is where I ask myself, is there anything this person can say to ruin the yes for me? And if the answer is no, then I will approve their visa because we can also predict what you're going to say.
mm,
So if I
mm,
ask you about financing, you're pretty much going to say, well, my dad does this. I'm also taking out a loan. So instead of hearing the spiel, I see that you're a credible student. I believe you. I want to issue the visa. I'm going to get you out of my window.
mm,
So that is
mm,
probably what happened in your case. So some people just are presenting so strongly as a student that they're an immediate yes. And so further questions are not required because I really don't want to waste my time. I don't have time to waste. Um, That's another thing with the hard nose. If you believe that finances are the number one issues, I might not even ask you about your university. I might immediately ask you about finances. And if I'm not convinced, say no. I'm trying to
Yeah. So
make the
for
best use of
example,
my
if I
time.
was
Hmm.
not me, but like for example, if I was going to USC, which is $100,000, now it's like, okay, I definitely want to know like how is he funding that much, because it is that expensive university.
100%. If that was the cost, I would have dug deeper.
Right.
I mean, you could have
Right.
still really impressed me and I might have still passed you, but
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
And is
more
it
likely, yeah. Mhm.
yes. Is it also true? Um, this I've like again I've heard conspiracy theory about visa officers that they are trained to read expressions and like psychology, like they just know that if the person is lying or not. Like, how true is this? And like, what kind of training do you guys do to catch this?
Did you see the CIA guy? There's like a CIA. Do you know what I'm talking about, Yudi? There is a guy
No.
who was a former CIA agent who has a podcast and he
Oh,
has a
really? No,
business
I have
now.
not.
He has a
No.
business now, yeah, and he talks about if you look him up, I'll have to find you his information. He if you look him up on YouTube, he'll talk about his CIA training, which is very sus because can you talk about that? I don't even know, but he talks about his CIA training. They put them in a house and there's all this like psychological stuff that the CIA agent has to go through, the nonverbal cues and some people who are originally hired don't make it because they can't lie. They're really bad at lying. Unfortunately, consular officers do not get any of this training.
Okay. So is it
Which
just
may
the
yeah,
reputation that like every
yes.
day they are just going through thousands of students, so now they know how someone is reacting, and based on that body language they can predict.
Yeah, so the longer you're in a country, you can kind of it becomes where I can guess your income based on, the information I have in the DS-160, how you're
Mm,
presenting at the window, and the repetition and the amount of people. I start comparing you to other people and building a profile for you in my mind.
mm,
But
mm.
but not a fair process, Udi, not a fair process. Like this is
Yeah.
not a good way to go about adjudicating visas, I think, but that is the way that it works. We don't get special
Mm.
training. Hmm.
Got it. Okay. And so now back to like funding. So if you are suspecting like, okay, I want to understand like how so again, some visa officers never ask for documents because the answer is good enough, and some don't. So is it pretty much how you answer that question? How are you going to fund yourself? Or is it something else that you are like provoking that I want to see the document as a proof?
In some countries, I know in some African countries, officers do look at documents a lot more. In India, documents have not been looked at. From 2018 to 2022, when I was adjudicating, it's very rare that a consular officer will look at financial documents. And that's
Mm,
because they're confusing. Uh, they can give you an entire book or a little tiny book of savings. So you're going to have to convince them of finances without showing them documents because there's also fraud and there's no time. So most of the time the consular officer is not going to look at any of these documents whether he believes you or not. He's probably not going to be looking at these maybe newer officers, maybe one-offs, but don't expect your finances to be scrutinized on paper.
got it. Okay. And so another myth is or misinformation, at least I think it is, that having an education loan is considered as a sign of like you don't have enough fund. That's why you're taking education loan. Is that really true?
No, actually, thought that I had a lot of thoughts on education loans, both at my time at the window, but recently with an institution that I partner with, we did a visa risk score study, and it actually showed better approval rates for people who have taken out loans versus not.
Mm,
So that was a very kind of one dimensional question and statistic, but it really prompted a lot of thinking. So you have to be able to fund your education and show that funding. So if you have an education loan, then that officer is feeling comfortable about your ability to fund your education. So how you're presenting that at the window, yeah, it's not your an education loan is not a bad thing. But if you don't need it, don't talk
Go
about
and get it.
needing it. I mean,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
can if you want. I've seen that too. I've
Mm,
seen students say, "I got an education loan as a backup, but I don't need it." But in that case, demonstrate how you are able to financially support yourself and say, "I got one as a backup." If you don't need one as a backup, you have really strong finances, just stick with that. But if you need an education loan, get one and talk about it, and that's okay too. And if it's a secure education loan, it's better than an unsecured education loan. So if if you have a very high education loan, that might hurt you, but again, the statistics were not really showing that. Even people with 70% of their education covered by a loan were still doing fairly well at the visa window, just as good as somebody with like 40% covered by an education loan.
mm.
So that's kind of what we were seeing. So
Got it.
fine.
Got it.
Hmm.
Okay. These series of like myths or misinformation is based on prior rejections. So first is, if you get rejected for your F1 visa. Actually, let's start with B1, B2. Like, I've gotten B1, B2 rejected. Now I'm going for F1. How is my prior B1, B2 rejection impacting my F1?
It'll
Or is it
impact you.
impacting?
It'll impact you, but it's a different standard for an F1. So how much it impacts you depends on the gravity of that B1, B2 refusal, what the officer wrote, and but that's different than a prior F1 refusal. So it
And
depends
do you
case to case.
guys see that this prior B1, B2 was rejected? Do you have that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Hmm.
Got it. Okay. And so, would you bring up like why, or do you already know why it was rejected based on the other officer's note?
Yeah, sometimes it could help you. I mean, it really depends. Like, say you were going with on a family trip on a B1, B2 visa, and at the time the consular officer thought you personally had too weak of a tie, but your family got theirs approved, but you got yours rejected. So that's a different refusal than if the officer said, they're rejected because of finances versus I'm approving the parents but not the student, and there's some information about your dad and he happens to be a lawyer, and and so it depends on that B1, B2 rejection. If you
Mm.
went there by
Mm.
yourself in your early 20s and you were going to go do something that's completely unrelated to that F1, now you have a really weird story in your background. So it really depends.
Mm. Okay. Okay. Now let's talk about F1. So they have gotten an F1 rejection, but this is another information that if you have F1 rejected in Delhi, now go to Mumbai and you will have better chances of approval. Same, they also say if you have gotten rejection for Chico State, maybe change your university, and because of that, you will get now approval. So, how true is this two statement?
So basically, myths happen when one person does something and they get an approval. So now all of a sudden, changing the university worked. It really
Mm,
depends.
mm,
Back before COVID, going from one consulate to another was seen as visa shopping. Now, consular officers are way more understanding and they know you're just trying to get an appointment anywhere. Changing your university
mm,
can be helpful if you're going for a different intake and you can discuss why you're changing the university and make a really strong case for that new university, or it could be looked at as you're trying to sway the consular officer by just switching university and you're directionless. So it
mm,
really depends.
mm. And finally, having a prior F1 visa rejection will or will not affect your next chance.
It will 100% affect your next chance. So we did the statistics on the visa risk scoring, and that was the number one indicator of an F1 refusal is a prior F1 refusal, unfortunately. So
Mm,
you really need to be extra prepared. Maybe you just
mm,
got nervous and you go in there. You have to be very strong the next time around because having that ding, especially if it's recent, it will impact you for sure.
Hmm. Hmm. Also, do you know if this is true that, I mean, this is also another information I've heard that if they get rejected, they don't get appointment for next 30 365 days. Is that true?
It depends. So it depends on the country, and it
Hmm.
depends on, for India, it depends on the consulate or the embassy. So the NIV chiefs, the non-immigrant visa chiefs, can turn on and off appointments for people with prior refusals based on their capacity there at the consulate or embassy. So they could say, no, we don't have the capacity to take anybody with prior refusals. Let's shut that off, or they can lift it. So that's why I tell students keep checking all the consulates and embassies, because some people with
Hmm.
prior refusals have been able to get appointments.
Nice. Okay, got it. Okay, cool. I think this is where we will end this part of the conversation. Any final tips, wisdom before we wrap up and then we talk about the next topic?
Write down your strengths and make sure that you know what your strengths are, and always lead with your strengths. Don't be humble at the visa interview. So that is my final tip for you.
Mm,
And also, if you have a prior refusal, definitely consider booking an appointment with me. I'm not just saying that to scare you, but a prior refusal should be taken seriously. You should either watch videos, be extra prepared. There's a lot of misinformation online, so just be careful on how you prepare. But good luck.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yes, awesome. Again, thank you so much. I can't wait to do this again. I know we're gonna talk about how to avoid visa rejection in the next video. So everyone, come back and yeah, thank you. All right, thank you again. I can't wait to do this one more time. I know next one we're gonna talk about how to avoid visa rejection. But until our next one,
Keep smiling, keep hustling.
nice, cool. All right.